What is up, folks? I'm online. Oh man. So today, what have I done today? So today, I did some more reading. I listened to some podcast episodes. It was like one podcast, but several episodes of the same podcast. It's called Enthusiasm. I highly recommend it. You should check it out. It's great. Also today, I discovered Patreon. Obviously not actually, but I discovered Patreon as a social network platform. It never really occurred to me, or I guess I never really saw the follow button. It didn't occur to me you follow people on Patreon and not pay them. And I think just every time, I don't know, I like when I get more and more familiar with Patreon, I just feel more and more confident that it's the direction that I would like to take whatever website that I make in. Because so I think I've explained it, briefly before, but so also, it's relevant to what I was doing today because so I was also looking at like places where I would want to apply to grad school. There's like this one program that I think I'm going to apply to that's in June that would like help me apply to grad school / would mean that if I do that, I would probably end up going to Michigan for grad school. Which I mean, that's what it is. It'd be interesting. It's an interesting idea what they've got going on, and I think it would be really good. Um, so the idea is to build a website vaguely like Patreon, cross between Patreon and Duolingo. So it's got Duolingo's like crowdsourcing, language-oriented, education-oriented website, but it's got Patreon's like, well, first of all, it's got Patreon's monetization model. I think Duolingo's monetization model is pésimo is the only way that I can really describe it. It's like, what are you doing? These are not like these people that are volunteering on Duolingo, like they're putting so much work into it, you know? And I don't know, they just deserve more than they're getting. I have a lot of thoughts about this, and I feel like if you could build something scalable, then you could open it up to like actual communities that need it, minority language communities, and it would be a really cool and powerful way to have community building in this sense on the internet. And I think it would be a really great thing to do. So that's what I want to do at this thing. So I need to find someone, or I need to figure out how to make my own website and also follow through. I guess follow through with what I'm trying to do. I guess that's all I did today. I just went to Burger King. Wow, I went to Burger King today. And the other thing, I discovered that last night, actually. That's not true at all. That's not when I discovered it. But I was on it last night. It was like a weird hour in the middle of the night. And I was like, you know what would be fun? Checking out who's currently broadcasting on Facebook Live for the general public. It was interesting. And so if you guys don't know, YouTube has, Facebook has this new-ish feature where you can watch things. That's obviously not new, but they have this thing where you can see a map of the entire world and everyone that's broadcasting live. I think it's really cool. I think it's really interesting. I think it's a cool way to like explore things that are popular and that people are watching from a particular region. I think something that's a little bit frustrating is that sometimes it's just like pirated cartoons or pirated TV shows or whatever. But for example, yesterday I was watching this like festival in the Philippines, and it was really interesting. It was really cool. It was like an interesting cultural moment. I asked my friend who's from there, um, and she was like, "Oh, I totally know what's going on." She like explained to me a little bit about what it was, and it's a cool little cultural exchange moment, right? Like I learned something about the people in the Philippines and their celebration. I believe it was yesterday, I guess. So she said Santo Nino. I'm not entirely sure what it means, and there was this other stuff that was going on in this special song, but I thought it was interesting. I don't know. Um, and this is one thing that I actually envision in this website. So I haven't really talked about it like this before, but what I envision is sort of like four separate portions to the site, and you've got the first part. And I guess as a whole, the idea is to decolonize in a sense, and the idea is to bring back bring it back to the local, right? In some sense. Um, and so the first page, I always kind of envisioned you would get the Google Maps, of wherever your location is, um, but the map would be labeled in the indigenous language of that area, right? So maybe if you're like, here's the thing, it's contentious. If you go to somewhere like England, and you're like, okay, the indigenous people here are not the English, actually. Um, the indigenous Britons were the, um, at least on the island of Great Britain, were the ancestors of the Welsh people, and kind of, I guess, the Scottish people. Um, Scottish people came in a little bit later with the Irish, with kind of the wave of Irish speakers. The ancestors of Irish people that went to the north area where I guess they were the Pickets. Yeah, the Pickets were living. Yeah. And so it gets a little bit contentious, right? Like, if you're like looking at all of the names in England, should everything be in Welsh? Should everything be in Pictish? No one knows Pictish. Like, that's not a popular language anymore. Right? But at the same time, I think it'd be really powerful to like look at all of England and see all the names in Welsh, right? Um, that being said, I think it would be more useful to have sort of a time aspect, right? So you'd be able to see, for example, this is what the world would have looked like if everything that's here today was still there, but all of the territorial boundaries were the same as like in the 1600s or whatever. And you have like, this entire area where I'm at would be labeled in Muncie or Unani or one of the Delaware languages. It'd be interesting to see, New York City and like the entire region, everything labeled in the indigenous language. And I don't know. This is something that I got to thinking about when I was reading about the Endangered Language Alliance and how they're teaching monthly classes here in New York City. I'm not in New York City right now, but in New York City, which is that way. And I think that'd be so cool to like, to Muncie, I was born here. I was born in Muncie land, on Muncie land. And I feel like in some ways, the least I could do to respect the culture and the people that came before, like, were forcibly removed in some cases. To learn about their culture and to learn about their history and to learn about their language. Language and culture and history are in many ways inextricable. But yeah. So there's 4 portions of the site that I imagine. In addition to having like obviously the geographic portion of the map, there'd be a temporal aspect to the map where you would be able to look, for example, you might say, for example, the Iroquois Confederacy in upstate New York. They expanded greatly during the colonial period, and it had to do with like the geopolitics of what was going on at the early colonial period. The French were sort of up there in the St. Lawrence River and affecting everything that was going on, right? So it'd be interesting to see, these maps. Unfortunately, I don't think, obviously, I feel like a lot of this cultural knowledge has been lost, given the fact that like it's been many generations since people have lived there. But I mean, what do I know? They probably do have a lot of cultural knowledge still, and it would be really interesting to see, if we could map out how the territory changed and like what things were called when people moved. To give another example with like England, like a lot of rivers in England are called Avon, because that means river in Welsh. And when they asked the Welsh speakers what this river was called, they said it's called a river. Like, what do you want me to call it, right? So there's a lot of rivers that are called that, and it's just because it means river, right? And similar things happened around here. For example, Mississippi. The Mississippi River means the big river, because Mississippi means big river. So, when you transfer things from one language to another, it'd be really interesting to know what changed or what stays sort of the same, what kind of gets mangled in translation. I just love maps so much, and they tell such a fascinating story. Anyway, so the next part would definitely be the social cultural aspect, and it would be much closer to what you see in like a news feed on Facebook, or like a Tumblr feed, Twitter feed, YouTube subscription feed, Patreon feed, all of these kind of feed style. That's generally what I'm going for. Definitely chronological order. I think I like what Reddit does, where you've got chronological order, you've got top, you've got controversial, you've got rising, things like that. I think it'd be cool to separate it out in different categories, and obviously trending tags and stuff like that. And I think essential piece to this portion of the site would be groups, and you would be able to self-identify as being part of different groups, and they would importantly be geographical groups and social groups. So I would, for example, put things like Colombian, but New Jersey in, Californian, Texan, things I even vaguely identify with. I don't actually identify with most of those. I guess I identify as Colombian, but like I'm Colombian American, so like, I'd also have to click American. There'd be like a lot of different groups, and the idea would be that you like join these different communities. But the fundamental point of this site is to learn a little bit about linguistics and what it means, because so much of linguistics, at least the linguistics that I'm particularly interested in, has to do with like the socio-cultural aspects, right? So what does it mean to speak the same dialect as someone, right? Like, if you are American, you speak American English to a degree, right? But like Californian English is different from New Jersey English and Texan English, right? Like all of those dialects are different, and in very systematic ways. Like in New Jersey, in Texas, they frequently distinguish between the vowels in caught and caught, which I don't distinguish, even though I grew up in New Jersey and Texas, not in California, but I didn't distinguish those vowels before I went to California. It doesn't really make sense, but that's in my particular idiolect. So an idiolect is one person's particular instance and production and perception of a language, but the actual accent and the actual dialect, well, accent isn't a word that I guess I'm going to define particularly, because it's not a word that I will consistently use. But the other dialects, they have stereotypic features that are associated with them, and you can study those, and those also importantly need a temporal sort of aspect, right? For example, Virginia English from the 1600s is not going to be the same as Virginia English now, right? Or same with like Georgia, right? The example of Atlanta is always given, and how Atlanta is this very non-Southern, linguistically non-Southern city, as opposed to places like Charleston and Savannah, where they preserve different features, and similarly in places like the Tidewater in North Carolina and Virginia. Those places preserve older linguistic features um, for specific reasons that have to do with my honors thesis, which I'm not going to talk about right now because I'll start talking for too long. But I want to talk about the last two parts of what my envisioned site would be. The other two parts. The third part, I'm debating which one I want to put third and fourth. So traditionally, I say traditionally now. So the way I'd previously thought of doing it is that the third one is this kind of AI and also points earning / like practice thing. So the idea is fairly simple. Here's what you do. You show people pictures a la Rosetta Stone, sort of. You show them one picture and you say, well, you don't show them just one picture. You give them a prompt. The prompt says, you're going to see some pictures, and your task is to, in this language, which is selected and very clear. Okay, so it's just dawned on me that this definitely needs to be the fourth, as opposed to the third part. But I'll talk about the actual third part in just a second. So the idea would be that these people have enough knowledge about linguistics to know that their idiolect and their dialect are not necessarily the same thing, right? And when they're learning a language, which is fundamentally what the site is supposed to be for, when they're learning a language, they are necessarily learning a dialect, right? A dialect. If you're learning Spanish, you have to learn either Mexican Spanish or Colombian Spanish or Spain Spanish or Argentinian Spanish. You know, all of these have different phonetic features. They have different grammatical features. They have different phonological features. They have different vocabulary, lexical entries. They are just different. You can't say I speak Spanish without saying I speak Colombian Spanish. I speak a variety of Spanish that is specifically from Medellin in Colombia and that is heavily influenced by Anglicisms in Hudson County, New Jersey. Right? Like, that's sort of complicated and long-winded, but if I'm going to explain my idiolect, that's what I would have to say. And my dialect, more broadly, would be Medellin Spanish, if you will. And crucially, it's not like my dad's Spanish, even though my dad is from Cali, which is a city just, I don't know, a few hours south of Medellin, but they pronounce certain things differently, they use different words. Like, his word for a bag is like chuspa. The first time I heard that, which I remember, I was like in the car with him, we were driving, and I think it was when my little brother had just thrown up, it was a lot. We were driving through the mountains, it's cool. Anyway. So he's asking me to pass him this bag, and I'm like, what in the world are you saying? He's like, la chuspa, and I'm like, la chuspa, and I'm like, what? So, there are lexical differences even within the same country. Even within the same community, right? So there's also social differences. And there are sociophonetic differences, right? Like, that's Bobo's famous study showing that, like, the same people would say fourth floor, would sometimes say fourth floor, depending on who they're talking to, etc. Right? And so the point of this AI part would be to tell people, to get the idea is for them to try to get some practice, right? So what you tell them is, they're going to see a picture, they're going to see an image, and their goal is to write something, to type something, right? And they're going to get more points. They get more points they get points related to, I'm trying to phrase this in English, it just sounds weird. The number of points that they receive is related to the number of speakers, native speakers, or fluent users, or whatever. This part would need to be established a little bit differently. For different languages, right? Because we have, like, large corpora for English and Spanish and etc. Right? But for Native American languages and stuff like that, it would be a little bit more difficult to say like, okay, we're gonna have all these native speakers come in and like double check, right? And especially the issue of like who exactly you're teaching in the language when it comes to Native American languages. That's really contentious as well, and that's something that's obviously really important. So the idea would be you are a learner of this language, and in order to practice using this language, you're going to describe these pictures. And you're going to do the best you can, right? Describe the pictures as best you can, and you will receive points related to how many other people described it in a similar way, right? So if they use the same verb, if they use the same noun, if they use the same adjectives, if they use the same anything, you would get more points, right? And the idea would be that you could use this to train an AI and teach it. Now, I'm not a computer scientist, so this is just an idea that I would really like to build on because I think it has a lot of potential, especially with the neural network API that Google recently put out. I think it has a lot of potential, and I think that would be a really cool way to actually crowdsource, actually teaching, actually all of the languages to an AI. Of course, that's a far off vision. And it would take a long time to do that, and it would take a lot of people to do that. But another super important thing related to that I think that I want to do is related to the points. So something that bugs me a lot is that in Duolingo you can't actually do anything for language. You get these points, and you're like, okay, now I have all of these. Like I can get a streak on Duolingo. Like, what did they do? Or a streak freeze. I mean, like if I forget a day, like it's not the end of the world, but also it wasn't the end of the world to begin with. Like I just feel like people are putting in substantial effort, and I feel like they can get a lot more, and I think there is potential to incentivize people in a different way as well. So something that I was thinking of is doing this as a way to practice, and including like other practice styles, like the ones that like Babbel has. Duolingo has some, or it has lately been coming out with like, good styles for you to try to learn from. And in general, I think a lot of sites too, like Memrise has good stuff. Babbel, Duolingo, there are others. But the idea would be to obviously put in things that would be helpful and like actually help people to remember, but also to teach the AI, because that's also really important. Or a specific task. The task is not, I don't know, to like sell. I'm not trying to sell languages. That's not at all what I'm interested in doing. What I want to sell, or oh my god, no, what I want to do is create an environment where you get to be immersed in your target language or target languages, right? So the idea would be you have an open source version of like the Facebook languages option, and you would actually be able to put things in your own idiolect even. And so the idea would be where you could go through and do things and like learn vocabulary. It was I had a conversation. No, it was something that I saw on Duolingo. Someone posted something that was like, when are they going to do a Duolingo course from English for English speakers? And the person was like, the person answering someone was like, what are you talking about? And they're like, no, listen, like, I want to learn SAT words, or I want to learn spelling words, or I want to learn like whatever, right? And it's just an interesting concept because it gets back to the idea that I'm sort of talking about here, where one, you're never really done learning your first language, and two, there's always going to be more, I guess, geographic variation, and you will always be able to like learn more, right? Like New York City English versus like Pittsburgh English versus like Los Angeles English. Like they use different words, you know. In New York, there's going to be a lot more. In my experience, there's been a lot more Yiddish loanwords, as opposed to in California there's a lot more Mexican Spanish loanwords, right? And I say Mexican Spanish as opposed to like Colombian Spanish loanwords, right? Like tortilla for me is like an omelet. Um, a tortilla, when I say it in English, I mean it's a tortilla. It refers to a Mexican tortilla, which is closer to what closer in form and I guess style to something that I call an arepa. But that's sort of besides the point. The point is to say that like it would be cool to have these like sets of words where you could say like this is LA slang, this is New York slang, this is London slang, and you get to learn like our slang or whatever. And that would also encourage people. In a lot of ways, people get really excited when they hear about like their differences and regional dialects and stuff. Like you have people going crazy over the soda pop Coke thing, and you obviously got the you, all, y'all, you guys, yins, yous thing. There's a lot of global variation there, and I want to map English on a global context. That they know, that they're learning, that they're trying to learn, that they're trying to practice. This would be for the sort of like Patreon side of things, where we want to help and encourage and facilitate, really, language teachers and language enthusiasts to come in and use linguistics, use the tools available through linguistics to really do their best, the best that they can do in terms of teaching. Right? So I think on my end, what I would need to do is put out some really fantastic teaching resources for English. Teaching resources for English, especially for, teaching resources in English, especially for teaching languages to English speakers. Obviously, not all of these people are going to be native English speakers, but especially in the US, it tends to be the case, right? So that would be something that I think would be really cool, where after, you know, you've gone through a certain amount of like testing, not like testing per se, but like once you know that, once you've got basic linguistic concepts under your belt, I think it's safe to move on to trying to help teach the AI so that you can participate and have a better immersive experience on the internet. Because I think that's what I'm fundamentally going for. In this decolonization kind of goal, the idea would be that we can move into a world where all languages, all dialects, all sociolects, all geolects, all communalects in general, all dialects in general, have equal footing on the internet. And in that sense, this feels like it's going to be the 21st century, in a way, the 21st century version of a dictionary, because it's not really working like on the basis of like language by language or like trying to build things like through the lens of other languages. It's fundamentally like you are building a corpus and you're helping build a corpus that is teaching about that language, that particular language, to an AI. And the AI is going to keep in mind things like your age and your gender and your. See, so these are the kinds of things that people would have to do when they like join groups, right? Like, I would join the group for like. I mentioned nationalities and stuff already. I probably would not feel very comfortable in either of the like man or woman categories, because I don't really identify that way. So I mean that'd be something the algorithm would take into account, and in some languages that would make a difference, perhaps. For example, if you have a language where there are 3 genders, masculine, feminine, and neuter, it might perhaps choose to use the neuter with me instead of the masculine or feminine. Things like that, right? So it would be sort of higher level dictionary, and it would work at the level of the platform as opposed to I mean, I don't know. It's hard to think of like an analog for what that's trying to be. But anyway, I've been talking for a really long time now, so I'm gonna go. I need to finish the translation for the language corner video in Spanish. I'm excited. I haven't started really on the translation, which is concerning because it's already Friday, and I said I would have it done by the weekend. But that's the same thing I did. That's the same thing I did last week with the other video. I think I'm procrastinating on it because it's like particularly artistic this week. And it's kind of a struggle. I'm not very artistic. But I thought a map of linguistics was the way to go, to kind of get a lay of the land and people really see what linguistics is and kind of, people's curiosity and get them to ask some questions, because that's kind of what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to teach people, right? I'm trying to answer their questions, and I have no questions to answer if they haven't asked any questions. So ask your questions. Go follow me on Patreon. You don't have to even pay me to follow me, apparently. So just go follow me. The Language Corner. Check me out. Check me out on YouTube. Because I want to teach y'all. Because linguistics is fun. I'm going to go now. Stay humble. Stay curious.